So then when people called me or pinged me to say, hey, will you run product for this startup or that startup? It felt crazy at the time. I said, I'm interested as long as it's 3 days a week. And it was a very provocative ask, but I found that there was some body of peeps that were willing to say yes. And so today you call that a fractional role. I think that's a fine way to think about it. I kept it super simple. I said, tell me the most expensive person in the building, and I'm going to take 3/5 their option grant and 3/5 of their salary. So that was aggressive. It caused them to think about it. And anyways, it was successful. I did it for a year with Life 360. And then I did the next year with NerdWallet. And then I did some time with Metromile. I don't think that was a full year. But it actually worked surprisingly well for me.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Supra Insider. Today, Mark and I sat down with Gibson Biddle, also known as Gib. Gib and I met over 10 years ago at Life 360, and he came in as a interim chief product officer. I learned a ton from Gib when we worked together. He told stories about his time working as the VP of product at Netflix. He was also the chief product officer at Chegg, had a bunch of entrepreneurial experience even earlier in his career at places like Sega and Mattel, and is just an overall one of the most interesting and thoughtful and engaging product leaders that I've come across. So it was really fun to sit down.
Yeah, we talked about a lot of things, including what motivated him to transition from a full-time product exec to an interim CPO. We also talked about what success looks like, both professionally and personally as a fractional exec, how he thinks about scaling his impact through content like talks, newsletter, courses. And then we went on a fun tangent of how he actually prepares for his talks and how he makes sure that he's getting feedback after every single presentation and why he thinks more people don't do that. We also talked about his experience building one of the best conferences for product leaders, the Product Leader Summit, and what he's learned from that experience because he's been doing it for 8 years. And then we finished with kind of a little bit of him sharing his learnings from his first Maven cohort and his future plans in that platform. Gib is someone who lives life on his own terms, and I find that incredibly inspiring. I think you're going to really enjoy that episode. Thanks for listening.
All right, we're live. Gib, thank you so much for joining us.
It is great to be here, Ben, and nice to see you, Mark, as well.
Great to see you.
It's been probably almost a decade now, I think, since I last had a chance to spend some time with you in person from our Life 360 overlap days. And where I wanted to start this conversation was in kind of that period where we met each other. And you had just come into Life 360 to be an executive in residence. You were the first, let's say, fractional or interim leader that I have seen in a seat. And I just learned a ton from you. And I never really stopped to ask you at any point, why are you doing this? And why are you not continuing with full-time traditional work? I would just love to maybe start this conversation with what made you want to make that transition from what we might consider traditional full-time W-2 life to whatever you were doing when we met.
Sure. To know and understand me, I'm pretty thoughtful and disciplined about how I spend my career, how I spend my time. 10 years ago, today I say I semi-retired 10 years ago. I don't think I knew that then, but I was financially independent. I had worked so I could pay for all my kids' education, houses, whatever was needed. My wife's in biotech. She had a similar career as me. So then it was just a question, how did I want to spend my time? And I was 52 then, and now I'm 62, older than dirt. But I had a bunch of hypotheses. And one of them was I was probably going to do it again, to be the product leader at another startup. The thing in my career is I look for startups with a proof of concept and I help them scale. And that's what I've always done. At that point in time, I was thinking maybe I had a list, board roles, angel, VC. That's a traditional path for a 52-year-old white male. I was very interested in teaching. My first startup was a sailing school and I loved teaching, but I also knew it wasn't a great career, that people don't pay very well for teaching and education, which is sad. I was also interested in being a speaker, a talker. And then I was interested in, mainly because I wanted more venues to talk. And back then, nobody would naturally invite me. So I started up something called the Product Leader Summit. Ben, I was struggling a little bit with what to do. And then I asked one of my pals, her name is Patty McCord. She was the head of HR at Netflix. And I said, hey, Patty, I'm having a hard time finding non-traditional roles. And she said, Gib, just tell people what you want. So then when people called me or pinged me to say, hey, will you run product for this startup or that startup? It felt crazy at the time. I said, I'm interested as long as it's 3 days a week. And it was a very provocative ask, but I found that there was some body of peeps that were willing to say yes. And so today you call that a fractional role. I think that's a fine way to think about it. I kept it super simple. I said, tell me the most expensive person in the building, and I'm going to take 3/5 their option grant and 3/5 of their salary. So that was aggressive. It caused them to think about it. And anyways, it was successful. I did it for a year with Life 360. And then I did the next year with NerdWallet. And then I did some time with Metromile. I don't think that was a full year. But it actually worked surprisingly well for me. And then I can tell you how the companies perceived it as well. It's a balancing act. Anyways, that was my 3-day a week. And it was good. For me, it was about making the transition from fully structured time in your career to a 3/5 structured time. And then over time, I got more and more comfortable with lack of structure. And I call that flexibility. So today, I love having the flexibility to say yes or no to things. I tend to ski my age in days. So it's easy now for me to ski 62 days a year. Over the last year and a half, my wife and I hiked 4,000 miles through hiking. We did the Pacific Crest Trail. We did the Costa Brava. We did the Camino del Norte.
Nice.
I have time for friends and family. We have a house in Bend that we love. And today is the first day the mountain open on November 15, which is freaking crazy and awesome. Okay, I'll let you go from there, Ben or Marc.
Yeah. I just love talking to people that are like living life on their own terms and just are not afraid to step away from like the conventional path or wisdom. And I'm curious, like how, as you were getting started into like this new path of doing some fractional or interim work, like how did you think about success and how often did you revisit that definition of success as like you spend more time in this like more unstructured world, if you will?
Yeah, well, fractional CPO role, frankly, most people thought it was crazy. In the case of Life 360, it very much seemed to me that the CEO, Chris, was saying yes to a 3-day a week role because he hoped by the end of a year, I would say yes to a 5-day a week role. So that's how it felt to me. And then my friend said, they basically argued, it's not going to be 3 days a week. If you're going to get sucked in, you're going to have to work a lot more, or it's going to be bad for the company. How do they make decisions on the days that you're out, et cetera? And I actually found all of those to not be true problems. The challenge that first year, eventually we called it an executive in residence for product. Because the reason was when Chris was pitching candidates for the full-time role, they would say, if it's so great, how come Gib's not taking it? And then over time, we learned to say, hey, Gib's not taking it because he's unwilling to work 5 days a week. And his job is to help us for about a year in this 3 out of 5 day role. What does success look like? The main thing as a product leader, when you come into a company, a bunch of the work is helping to set the strategy, help the organization get set up to innovate on multiple threads, if you will. It's all a lot of people issues. Most startups are formed with kind of friends and family. Oh, yeah, my cousin's good. And so you come into that and you're helping the company to turn into a kind of a real company. And so I was able to do a lot of those things on a 3-day a week basis. The other thing, Chris, wonderful entrepreneur, wonderful CEO. Life 360 has been much more successful than I expected. It's got like $2 billion market
Just
cap.
past 3 billion, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, 3 billion. Yeah, sometimes I have to switch around because Australian and US dollars.
But now it's publicly traded in the US.
Yeah, I know it is. Yeah. I don't think he really knew what a product leader looked like. So in part, he could see how I did the job, what I thought the responsibilities were. And I guess with Life 360, I was hoping that by the end of the year, they would find the right full-time product leader. I was hoping that they were more disciplined, had a faster cadence. They use language like, my hypothesis is. One of the things I did was I set up these quarterly product strategy meetings. I thought they were very helpful. Basically, startups are very good at thinking at the 1 and 2,000 foot level, but rarely think at the 5 and 10,000 foot level. So I was just helping them with that. And in the long term, most startups I work with, you want to get the next round of funding at the valuation that's what they want. And in the juncture that I work with, it's usually trying to get them on a path to go public. And that's actually worked with both Life 360 and with NerdWallet for me. If I recall, Metromile did they got acquired. My guess is that wasn't the outcome they were looking for.
And what about success from like your personal life perspective, right? It seems like you went into that phase like wanting to use your time wisely and making sure that you're making the most out of your time and have that flexibility. Like, how did you measure success in your kind of personal life when you made that transition?
Yeah, for me, it was truly trying to work only 3 days a week and having those other 4 days. I'm very good about setting up fun and interesting things in those other 4 days. Or sometimes it's, quote, life maintenance. Do the next house project, take kids on a college or med school or business school tour. I don't actually have a proxy for that. I've learned a lot about the transition from full-time work to semi-retirement. And what you're really trying to do is work provides this social context. You have work friends, so you need to replace that. Work provides structure. You go into work every day, and so you need to replace that. Work provides purpose. What is the company trying to do? So you need to develop your own purpose. Work provides a learning and growth opportunity. I'll call that mastery. And so you need to be able to define those new vectors that you want to learn and grow on. And then the last thing, I half joke and I'm half serious about this. For men, especially, they view their income as kind of a report card. How much value am I bringing to the world? And it's hard for them to let go of that. So I have learned, in the last 10 years, I've been very successful in all of those things. Back then, my side projects, I was teaching an entrepreneurship course, master's, graduate level engineers at Stanford. I did that for 3 years. I really liked it. I experimented with board roles. I was on the board for NerdWallet, concluded I wasn't crazy about that. I actually wasn't crazy about teaching in the classroom. I love teaching outside the classroom. I invest my time in companies, but I'm not an angel investor or VC. Frankly, I don't care enough about money to be a VC. That's not exactly how I roll. And then the thing I got way into, it's an offshoot of teaching, but I'm a storyteller. I love doing talks. And so I don't know if it fit in that first year. I'd say over the first 2 years of my semi-retirement, I did 100 talks, 100 free talks.
Wow.
Yeah. So when people come to me and say, how do I become a speaker? I try to set expectations. Just so you know, my first 2 years, I did 100 free talks. Ben probably saw 8 of them, right? I would talk about.
I feel like I was one of the people at like the Comedy Cellar when someone's coming to workshop their half-baked material and getting a chance to just get it raw and give feedback, and then watching you take those, Gib, and you're still giving like the DHM talk in a much better way now, or your product strategy talk, or the Netflix stories. Like I saw the seeds of a lot of those talks that are now incredibly polished and buttoned up when they were just being workshopped. It was so cool.
Yeah. And so if you think about that concept of mastery, I've really been trying to become more impactful for the product community at large. And I do think about leverage. A 3-day-a-week product leader job, there's a ton of leverage. And now I'm really trying to help thousands of product leaders in parallel. So and you can tell what my purpose is there as well, to help other product leaders to learn and to grow. there's a component when you're 62, you think about aging gracefully. So I do believe that constantly challenging my brain to get better on these vectors, or, oh my God, I'm going to have to go the deep dive AI, right? And how does that impact the work that I do, which is way cool. Like I can now speak French. Like my avatar can be recorded, and then my voice can be recorded and then be translated into 40 languages. Like, okay, that's freaking cool. But these are the things that help me to age gracefully.
I look back at, Mark, I'm thinking about your question about success. And one of the things I didn't hear from you, Gibbs, so far is that when you came into Life 360, in hindsight, there's clear evidence that you came in, and in addition to trying to create all the value for the company that you described in success for Life 360, there was this. And I remember I gave a lunch and learn at that point. I did like a lunch and learn on my blogging. And I remember you came up to me after my lunch and learn, and you're like, Ben, let me ask you a question. Should I start writing online? Should I start publishing? And so you were clearly on a path of between the content and the workshop where there was a clear transition in hindsight, I think, for doing what you're doing now. And I'm curious if at that point in time you saw these things as like experiments that you were running, or whether there was a bit of more conviction behind, like more wood in that arrow.
Yeah, for me, I definitely approached my life as a series of experiments. And I do remember that conversation. And obviously, my heart and soul was in talks, right? I loved it. And it is a little like, the stand-up comedian. Like I play off the energy in the crowd, and I'm really trying to land ideas. And then, yeah, my question to you was real. I think you had done a little writing. And by the way, many of these experiments, like, you approach with fear. Like, I was afraid to write. I was like, people like my stuff. Am I good enough? Blah, blah, blah. And what happened was I started to write on Medium. And that was just where I was just finding my voice, if you will. At the beginning, I would share my essays with 6 or 8 people. It took like frickin' 2 weeks. And then pretty quickly, my only helper was Grammarly. And then I pretty quickly learned that to find out what works or doesn't, what resonates or doesn't, you just freaking hit the publish button. And so I got to a higher cadence. And then after a while, probably the most impactful thing for me in my career as a teacher was I wrote a series called How to Define Your Product Strategy, with a series of tools, models, and frameworks that had worked for me as a product leader. And so I published that. Today, it's probably got an aggregate of 50,000 hearts, or whatever they call them. They're called hearts on Medium. And then at some point, I transitioned. I could tell the cool kids were on Substack. So I transitioned there. One of my pals said, Gib, treat email addresses like dollar bills. But with Substack, I could have the emails. Then I'm really good at being bad at things. Like I'm unembarrassed by being sucky. And I'm also like, I remember Lenny. Lenny was one of the early cool kids on Substack. And I'm asking him, like, okay, how does this work? And he's just keep writing. And he did say to me, sometimes I approach things too enthusiastically. I was writing like an essay a day.
I remember.
Wow.
It was wild. Yeah.
And
I was like, how long is Gib going to keep this going?
Exactly.
That's cool.
Lenny's, Gib, slow down. Once a week. And then, of course, I probably, I don't know, maybe I have 35,000 subscribers or something, but I haven't written for a year and a half, largely because that 4,000 miles of through hiking with my wife. Anyways.
Which I followed the writing about. It sounds like you tapped into a different kind of like joy for writing when writing about your backpacking.
Yeah. And it's funny, I did create a new talk, which is lessons learned from the Pacific Crest Trail. My wife has her own version of that. She does for the biotech community. I've done it once for the Product Leader Summit. And it's funny, one of the things I learned in that process was the value. I mean, I think maybe young kids might call it journaling. But for me, just writing is this act of journaling, and it really helps tease out what you're learning or what your focus is, etc. That was an accident. And I realized on the PCT things, I joke, yeah, I became a travel and adventure writer. I think I have like maybe 800 subscribers for that. I didn't expect a lot, but it really helped me to codify that experience and my learnings.
And I'm curious, like when you decided, hey, these journal blogs that I have from my travel might be a good talk. Like for someone who's listening is like, oh, I would like to start doing more talks. What is your process to decide? Okay, I think this topic is one worthy of me doing a talk on, and
Yeah.
also I think I have enough to say that people might find it interesting. Like, how does that work for you?
Okay. If we want to do first of all, I actually learned quite a bit about this from professors, from academics. And the seeds of their ideas are born sometimes through writing and sometimes through a talk. And sometimes you go back and forth. So I guess the first thing is take the seed of that idea and try writing an essay and just see if it's got play, like if people like it. But frankly, just codifying that in writing is super helpful. I'm a little weird. It's very natural for me to build a presentation. It's fun. I like it. So I'd say probably 2/3 or 3/4 of my ideas are born in a presentation format. I guess it's like many creative things, just put something out there. I'll tell you my mistakes as a speaker. I learned so much about presenting and storytelling, largely through doing. And then Ben knows I'm like a feedback freak. So I've collected like 2,200 Net Promoter Score survey results. And that's my proxy metric for talks. And some of my super low ones, I did a talk called How to Become a Rock Star Speaker, something like that. And I was so excited about it. And my NPS for that the first time was like 20, which if it's a 20, I'm like, I'm not doing it again. And I realized that the people who came to that talk, what they really wanted to know is about the business of speaking. They didn't want to know just how to do it. They want to know, how do you actually get paid for this stuff? And then, so that was me learning that actually is too niche a topic. Whereas strategy, not niche, right? Product strategy. Anything with AI today, not niche. Do that. Anything that can fundamentally help people with their careers and you're the Yoda to help them advance in their career in a leveraged way, like they read an essay you write and it's helpful to them, like that's good stuff. Oh, and then you have to be really interested and passionate yourself. I think that's more important than being an expert in it, because the passion and interest will drive you to become an eventual expert, as long as you have good feedback systems and you figure out how to make it better every day.
So it sounds like the process, like you'll write it down, then see, okay, is there any holes in my logic? Does this make sense? Is there actually enough content here for me to do a full talk? Then maybe testing that talk with a smaller, more trusted audience, if you will, get some feedback.
Honestly, I don't even think trusted. If you find an audience of 20 people or online, and if you get 50 people, like you're going to learn a ton. And it ain't about the specific composition of the audience at that point in time. There's two things that I'm chewing on right now, maybe three. One, I have to figure out how AI plays in the stuff that I talk about and think about. And there's just incredible hunger right now. So that's okay. I got to figure that out. And it's going to be my way. And then another area is, I brought it up, the leadership lessons from the PCT. My Net Promoter Score for the first time with a VP level audience of 150 people at the Product Leader Summit was 70. And I define 70 as world class. And I define 50 as good or very good. And then when people do this for the first time, I just warn them, it's going to be brutal. You're going to get a 30. And that's okay. Anyways, so that one I'm thinking about, and I'm actually wondering if it can be beyond the product community. It can be like a TEDx talk, essentially about leadership and maybe life. I don't know. I'm chewing on that. And then the third vector is I actually have kind of in my head a series on how to define your company's culture. Very analogous to the step-by-step approach I had for product strategy. I've been chewing on that. I think I'm just going to have to do it. I have to write the series, I don't know, on Medium or Substack. But my challenge with that one is most CEOs don't intuitively care about culture. Let's just get the next round of funding, right? Until bad things happen. And they discover their company's way too sucked up in processes and rules. And they notice there's a pod of hires over here that they're like, why the heck do we hire these people? Anyways, on the culture, I just got to write it and see what happens. It may be too niche. because eventually a CEO cares and the exec team cares, but somebody 5 years into their career probably doesn't care, and they don't really feel like they have a big impact on this. So anyways, I'm just trying to illustrate how I think about these things. And for other potential speakers out there, just frickin' do it. Put it out there. I know, like, people love to trash talk, Net Promoter Score, NPS. It's probably been the single most helpful thing for me in learning how to get good at teaching and talking. So there's one other, so you learn by doing. And the other thing is, at some point I found a pro. Her name is Lauren Weinstein. She was some flavor of professor at Stanford. And she in just 3 1-hour sessions, she taught me a level of discipline I didn't know about, like ruined my life. Because now when I see a speaker, I can tell they've been trained, a total trained speaker. There's tells. And it was like, oh my God. It's like those damn things on Instagram where a magician shows you how they did the trick, right? And that's why I say Lauren was incredibly helpful to me, but she ruined things for me.
One of the things I think about with your content, Gib, and I'm curious if you think this is a trick that can be learned or if there's just something else that's playing into it, but I feel like I've seen you give something like the DHM talk or product strategy talks, I don't know, 3 or 4 times, and they don't seem to get old. And it's not like a movie that I watch and I don't want to watch it again. There's something about the content and the way that you do these talks and present this material that feels like new when I consume it again. I'm just curious, is there anything you're doing in particular to create that effect?
Yeah, definitely. And when I said earlier, do it your way. So just a couple things about talks. If you want to drive the discipline it's storytelling. I was walking along and this bad thing happened to me. And here's what I learned from it. And this is how you can apply this thinking to make your life better. That's the general structure. And it's in 3s. There's the beginning, the middle, and the end. Yeah. And there's a little intro up front. You start hot to engage people and you close it out. Here's what you learned today. That's high level. That's what it is. And it's all driven by stories. You can think about Odysseus. He had all these horrible things happen. Okay. So now my way. So what powers great talks is engagement. So how do you engage an audience? And so storytelling will do it. Or right now I could say, I want you to think about a moment in your time when you were really afraid, right? Like now you're thinking about that. Or what's your greatest fear? You're engaging. My engagement tactics, so some simple ones, I use Slido integrated into Google Slides. And so I do lots of polling along the way. And the audience's answer become part of the content on the fly. Okay? And then I love cases. So I'm always farming for cases, and I tend to use Netflix as sort of example. And the reason is that most people know the Netflix product. I swear to God, I would use Square as an example, but most people don't know Square. And this is a struggle I have with enterprise software, et cetera. Most people don't really know it. Anyway, so to answer your question, the reason that my talks feel fresh to you is because of the cases. And I tend to update the cases on an ongoing basis. And the other beauty of cases, they're fresh for me too. Okay. So every time I have a conversation, I hear new points of view on why Netflix should choose to sign a $150 million deal to get 2 live football games on Christmas Day. Right? That's a case. Okay. Why should we do this? Why shouldn't we do this? How does this work with the delighting customers and hard to copy margin enhancing ways model, the DHM model? And it's great for me because I always get fresh thinking. And then my job is to farm for dissent, to get conflict. Conflict is interesting, right? And then people are creating the content for me. And talk about engagement. If you're there and suddenly you find yourself pounding your fist saying, it is stupid for Netflix to do live sports. It's not evergreen. If they do this one deal, they're bringing in lots of new members that think they're getting a lot of live TV and they won't for years. So like that person is super engaged. Okay. And then there's the foil, the other person on the other side of the audience saying, oh my God, you're going to sign up 800,000 new members in a day. That's freaking awesome. And it marries well with advertising. Like, you're going to pick up another 30 million from the advertising blocks on those two games. This makes great sense as a business. Anyways, so cases for me make things interesting. The other thing that was funny was, like many, when COVID hit, I was having fun traveling the world on other people's nickel, doing talks and workshops. All of a sudden, I'm in my basement. Literally, I was in the back of my garage in Burlingame, California. I didn't have lights. I didn't have any audio gear. I'm like, what the hell am I going to do? But I had this theory that basically Zoom talks were going to be more engaging than in-person talks. And how did I prove this? NPS was higher for online stuff, virtual stuff, than in person. And the reasons, I know everybody's name in the audience. I just look at their name in the Zoom box. It's easier to engage in Zoom. Like, people are chicken, right? It's very hard in a 200-person audience to put your hand in the air and say something. It's super easy to say something in chat. And then that's like the on-ramp for engagement. And it's super easy to say yes or no to one of my online polls. And then at some point, it's easy to raise your hand. And then I can pull those people into the cases. And so the virtual setting is actually more engaging than a real audience, which is fascinating to me. And the downside is I don't really get to know people around the world. I'm not going to get invited to go skiing with someone in Switzerland because they were on my virtual class.
Speaking of in-person stuff, I want to ask you at some point about the Product Leader Summit. But before I do that, just something very quick something that I've noticed that people don't really ask for NPSs in talks. Like, it's like maybe I see it 1 in every 10. So how do you ask for this score? Do you just have a QR code at the end of your talk? Is that the best way that you found?
That is the best way, but it's fun to say how I got there. I used to have to ask the organizer to just send an email immediately, and they didn't. And then United Airlines is always asking me for my feedback. I really don't give a shit. I don't want to give United Airlines feedback. Don't care. But I was in Toronto. This is pre-COVID. I was frustrated. And these 23-year-old engineers said, hey, Gib, use a QR code. And this is probably 8 years ago. And I'm like, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Back then, QR codes were what you passed in the airport, and it turned out it worked great. So yes. And the way I do it is I have a wind up, but people can tell that I really want their feedback and it's helpful to me. So my wind up is, this is the awkward part. I feel like a street performer. I'm putting out my hat, but I'm not asking for money. I just love your feedback. And then I blast up the QR code. I ground them. I say 0 sucks, 10 is awesome. Pick whatever number you like. But just so you know, this is the 2,212 feedback, and it's incredibly helpful to me. Thank you in advance. And that's how I do it. But yeah, blast the QR code. And the reason, my theory on why you don't see this all the time, I think people are afraid. I don't really think they want to know how their talk is. And there's something worse thing. They tend to feel better about their talk than it really is. And that's because their friends walk up to them afterwards. And even if your talk sucked, right? If you remember in the Biden-Trump debate where Biden fell off the rails, right after his wife came up and said, you did a great job, honey. So my theory is people really don't want to know. And so the NPS, it is the best proxy metric I have found. And actually, there's a little nuance. I actually ask people, ask them 0 to 10, what's good, what could be better? And my fourth question is, would you be willing to provide an endorsement for me? Give me your email. And so I actually look at the percentage of people who actually give me their email. They said it.
That's genius.
Right? And it frankly, it correlates very highly. If you get a 70 NPS, it's about 20% of the audience will give you their email. And if your NPS is 50, it's going to be like 3%. So it does correlate. But these are some of the tactics I use when I get
so smart,
terribly engaged in the debates with people that thinks that Net Promoter Score is evil.
Um,
I mean, it's got flaws in other use cases. If there's like a niche B2B software tool and it's asking me how likely are you going to tell your friends and colleagues about this tool, part of what factors in for me is I don't know how many of them care about this. So like maybe that's to me one of the biggest critiques of the way the question's structured. But
but with speakers,
but speakers it works I think pretty well.
Speakers, if they reject NPS for all those reasons, then ask them, okay, so what is your proxy metric?
I don't think
they're going to say crazy stuff like the number of Twitter retweets, right? Oh my God, shoot me.
The number of downloads or visits or views, those feel like vanity metrics. I mean, they're good to know how it's doing, but they're not going to tell you the quality.
Yeah, just ask people. Ask them what they think.
One thing that I would love to ask you about too is the Product Leadership Summit that you put together. And I believe you've maybe done it for 8 years or 10 years, like a long time. And I feel like after I think it's like a 2-day conference, like my LinkedIn just blows up with posts of people saying, hey, this is the best product leadership conference I've ever been to. I know people from my network that have gone to it and have great things to say. And I just feel like I don't really see that from other conferences. So why do you think people love the conference so much? And like, what have you learned about putting in-person events that have led you to this point?
Okay, so that's an 8-year labor of love project. It's actually my 9th year because I test drove something similar, but part of it is I have to love the people I'm working with. Like, I don't have to work with anyone. So there's a team now that I've worked with pretty consistently for the last 8 years. So the way it works is we'll get about 1,000 people who apply. We aggressively signal VP level leadership, CPO, maybe director at a company like Microsoft. So we have 1,000 applicants, then we build a class. And we'll invite around 150 peeps, consciously 50-50 male, female, try to do 20% Black Latinx, which is super hard. So we're building a class. And then I think I joke that after 8 years, I finally succeeded in building a community. But there is a real community. And so it's analogous to my cases. The content isn't the speakers. The content is the people. And giving them space and time to connect with each other in non-goofy ways. So I'll give you a big innovation this year. We now do a dinner the night before. And we said, hey, come an hour before and we'll go on a walk together. A walk! There's nothing hard to execute about a walk. And it's hysterical. Almost everyone showed up an hour early. And we walked, and then we all, an hour later, have dinner. But just giving people that time to talk with each other and create real connection with name tag. So the theory is it's not really about the content. There's another hack on that. Of course, everybody's blasting their QR codes, which I've provided after every talk or workshop. The main stage, it's really hard with a 150-person audience to do a great talk because there are differences in that audience. Everybody's interested in different things. So we kind of limit it to maybe 3 main stage talks, but we give them, they pick 3 or 4 1-hour workshops for them. And so instead of a 150-person audience, it's more like 40 people. And again, it's easier to get to know people in a 40-person audience. And then they've chosen what they want the talk they want to go to, if you will. So it's much more targeted. So it's great for the speakers and workshop hosts. It's easier to do a great job with an audience that says, I want to go to your talk. Other hacks, just basically don't overprogram it. Give it time. The recruiting of speakers, it's with thought and care. Like you want to make sure you can see a talk on YouTube. Ideally, you know what their NPS is. So just approach it thoughtfully. But the main thing on that thing is to think it's all about creating connection with people in the audience, helping them to connect with each other, which in my career, it's been awesome. Like back in the day, it was like, okay, mobile versus web. I could send a text to 8 other product leaders and see what percentage they were, right? Like today, like people are asking straightforward questions about, okay, what are you thinking with AI? What's the right level of investment? What does it look like? What are the experiments? And that's incredibly helpful to product leaders to have, I call it a personal board of directors. It's a concept that I use in my career. What else on I said this early on, You guys were asking me about 3 and 6 month goals. I'm now much more comfortable thinking about, okay, what am I trying to do in 5 years? I'm much more patient than I used to be. And the Product Leaders Summit is a good example of that. And there were experiments along the way. Like, we thought we were going to do it twice a year, East Coast and West Coast. And then we were just so freaking burned out after a New York one. We're like, okay, we're not doing it. And then you can take a year off if you want. Or to the organizing team, like, you can take a year off for a year. That's okay. Like the last 2 years, I was off the grid a lot of time, recruiting speakers from the tops of mountains. That was the way I could contribute to the team.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
Oh,
I
I
feel
have
like
one other really interesting thing. So the Hamilton Helmer has this concept of building hard to copy advantage. It's like delighting in hard to copy, margin enhancing ways. He calls them 7 powers. And one of them is counter positioning. So an example of counter positioning for Netflix was when they were competing with Blockbuster, Netflix said no late fees. Blockbuster, the most substantial part of their business came from the late fees. So they couldn't do that. Right. So for us, like, I'm sure Lenny's event was freaking awesome. But in a conference, it doesn't work that well to only have 150 people. And that's the beauty of this for us. 150 people, you can connect with each other. It doesn't feel too big. The introverts love it. Whereas 1,000, which is what's required to make the business work, most people have to go big. So we can be a 150 person audience thing. And guess what? How do we make the business work? All we're trying to do is cover our costs. We're not trying to make money. Okay. So this is an example of counter positioning where no other conference would bother to do what we're doing because it's a labor of love project.
No, that's such a good point. I was in the Lenny's conference. Yeah, definitely. It was great, but it definitely felt very big.
Yeah. No, and I did. Now I'm curious. I did coach his organizer on
Mustafa?
on the NPS systems. And of course, as soon as the event ended, I'm like, what'd you learn? I haven't gotten an answer yet, but I'm very persistent because really what I'm trying to do is understand what speakers we should be recruiting next fall.
Nice. I'm meeting with him next week, so I'll ping him about it.
Well, say hi from Gib. Okay.
Will do.
So Gib, as we come to a close here, this has been awesome. I know that you're gearing up for another experiment on Maven. So you have a new course. You've got a few cohorts that are open. And these are going to be a series of monthly, I think, 3-hour workshops over the course of just one day. Yeah. And so my question for you is, what are some of your biggest hypotheses or the things that you'll be monitoring with the first cohort to know what to change perhaps in future cohorts, or what you like and don't like about the format? And what would our audience maybe need to know to decide if they want to join?
Yeah. So if you didn't get the memo, I am strategic in my thinking about how I spend my time and navigate my career and these experiments in my semi-retirement. And anyways, so I am on Maven, Section, and Teachable. And I did do an 8-hour workshop on Maven probably a year ago. It's just hard to fit in when I'm basically through hiking. And the NPS was not as high as I expected or wanted. So my current theory, and I'll test this for the first time on Tuesday, is people are busy. So I am giving, and the other reality is I am busy. Like my perfect day is to do a 1-hour talk in the morning and then go skiing the rest of the day. Okay. So the 3-hour product strategy workshop on Maven, which costs $250, it's not a ton of money. The idea is to be fast-paced and cruelly efficient at landing these tools, models, and frameworks that I have found to be incredibly helpful. And that's what we're doing. Now, the difference between 3 hours and 8 hours is in 8 hours, they are working through the frameworks themselves using these pre-formatted Google Slides in real time. And my challenge in Maven, this is the thing that I think made the NPS lower than I wanted, was I used breakout groups. But as hard as you work to bring like-minded people together in a breakout group, it doesn't work. Somebody's in the breakout group, and really what they want to do right now is make their kids lunch. And then there's another person that, no, they really want to do the work so they can apply the learnings, et cetera. 3 hours, fast-paced, cruelly efficient cases for each model. But then I do provide these pre-formatted Google Slides for them after the fact to do the work on their own. That's what I'm hoping will happen. And then, of course, I give them essays, etc., so they can use these tools, models, and frameworks and apply it either to their overall company or to their swim lane, the component part of their product organization, in a step-by-step way. But it only requires 3 hours. That's the theory. We'll see how it goes. It drives me a little crazy because I have 200 people for the first one, and that's, oh crap. If I wish it was smaller.
You could set a limit.
I'm a
I
little
did that
more
with
open
my
to the
first
experimentation, but
my first go.
I will be experimenting. And it's fun. It really is fun. These online platforms for learning I think they're really impactful, and they certainly give me a lot of leverage. And I think they're a great way for people to keep learning on the side. So anyways, I'm hopeful. And yes, I'll be doing it about every month. So you can sign up for the December one now, or the next cohort is in February.
We'll include a link to that in the show notes for folks to sign up.
Great.
And what's crazy is I learned that Maven has 17 employees. So they're building this whole platform with 17 people. Pretty impressive.
The fun thing is, I know that about Maven. I know a lot about Maven. I also know a lot about Section, which is another platform. And I also know a fair amount about Teachable. I also know a fair amount of Reforge, and it's fascinating. And I don't really know who's going to pop. I have a guess, but I'm not going to say it on this platform. But it's fun to be engaged with 4 startups in parallel and have a little bit of skin on the game. And some of them I do have options, as well as the fees that are coming in for the work I do.
For sure. All right, we want to let you get to the mountain. So as the final questions we have for you is, one, if people want to learn more beyond going to the Maven page about what you're up to and following your thinking, where would you direct them? And secondly, is there anything else they could do to be helpful for you?
Yeah. Well, GibsonBiddle.com. Gibson like the guitar, Biddle rhymes with middle. It will take you to my crappy website, which I decided wasn't that important, but it'll take you in directions you want to go, to watch videos or read some of my writing. I do have an Ask Gib Substack. So Gibson Biddle Substack will take you there. It's been interesting to me, despite the fact I haven't written in a year and a half, it still has a lot of traction. Because I wrote so frenetically, I don't know, there's between 50 and 100 essays. And they're most of them are time tested. So because I'm frickin' 62, I have a long vantage. So I tend to write about issues that are probably important in the long term. And then I have a much longer term perspective on life and career than I had when I was a punk kid at the right place at the right time in my 20s at Electronic Arts. So it's different. I'm much more patient today.
It's been a real pleasure just knowing you over the years, and I've learned, and I continue to learn so much from you, and I know a lot of other people probably feel the same. So thank you for doing what you're doing and sharing all of these lessons with the product community. I know it's making a real impact.
Thank you. That's very kind, and thank you for noticing.
For sure.
And I know this is a labor of love project for you as well, so thanks for doing that.
We're certainly not making any money on this. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Yip. We'll let you get to the mountain. Enjoy.
Peace.
That's a wrap.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who you think would benefit from it as well. We really appreciate it. We'd also love a follow or a rating on Substack, Spotify, or YouTube. That's going to let other people find us. And if you have any topic recommendations for a future episode, please send myself or Mark a DM on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.